One day in September back in 1998, two people who had been waiting patiently for a child received a phone call that their baby girl was being born. They'd never been more excited to have their vacation interrupted, but they drove 2 hours anyway so they could get the chance to meet her. I'm assuming most of y'all don't know, but that's the plotline to a book called Tell Me Again About the Night I Was Born. And that's the same book my parents read to me every night until I was old enough to comprehend the fact that I was adopted. Ever since I knew that, I understood what was happening and that I was adopted and they were my adopted parents, but not every kid um, gets that luxury. And I am here to fight and show you all that while birth parents do have a right to privacy, adoptees are denied a human right when they are denied access from their original birth certificate, and they deserve the right to know. This movement began gaining publicity in the 1970s. There were two lawsuits that were filed that said that sealing these records from adopted kids was unconstitutional. So in the 1980s, the Model State Adoption Act was passed, stating that all adoptees had access to all their records once they turned 18. When Reagan became president, these rights were given back to the states, and they were at their own accord to determine um, how much access, if any, adoptees were given. Just for a little history, there's around 120,000 kids that are adopted every year. And according to Kies et al. In a study done in 2008, studies have reported an elevated risk for psychological maladjustment in adopted kids as compared to representative samples of non-adopted kids. So adoptees are often left with an empty hole or feeling that they don't belong or fit in, and understanding that feeling that adopted kids have and what it's like to be adopted is a huge part of what's missing in the adoption process, especially when it comes down to the future. With the biggest issue being we don't know our family history, our medical history, or our cultural history without having access to those records. And that's something that growing up as a kid, I know most people, if you took genetics or anatomy or biology in high school, and you got to the genetics unit, you were able to go home and be like, Mom, I have a hitchhiker's thumb. Let me see yours, and kind of figure out what side of the family that came from. But that's not something that, uh, that's a part that's missing from adopted kids' lives, which is why it often leads to them having a higher rate of psychological issues. And Hannah Grieco shared her story a little bit in the Washington Post and said that I was able to meet my biological father and learn about my family, which informed the choices I make regarding my children's medical care. As a fellow adoptee, that's another part of what the problem is. She was able to see the names on her original birth certificate and get that history because of the state that she was born in. But I cannot because the laws in Georgia are restricted and prevent me from seeing the names of my biological parents. So when I want to have children one day, I don't get to know this medical history going into pregnancy, relationships, motherhood, and that needs to change. The United States of OBC, or Original Birth Certificate, ran by the Adoptee Rights Law Center, monitors laws in all 50 states plus DC, and they summarize any restrictions that limit an adult adoptee's right to obtain an original birth certificate. They also say that only 10 out of 50 states actually allow complete full access when adoptees turn 18. So that means there's 40 states that have a restriction on allowing these adopted kids to access their original birth certificate. They also document the type of restriction that these states have, and it can be one or more of the following. They can be unrestricted, restricted, compromise, have extreme fees, have to have an adoption registry requirement, a database requirement, or there might be a redaction. They might need birth parent consent. Zombie vetoes could be in place, which is when a birth parent passes away but had already said no, that cannot be overturned, or an education requirement. And it can be a combination of one or all of these things. Governor Cuomo of New York City became the most recent governor as of January 2020 to give full access to adoptees. And he states for the New York State that after years of being denied this basic human right, adoptees will finally be able to obtain critical information about their origins, family history, and medical backgrounds. While fighting for the right to know for adoptees, the right to privacy side of things with birth parents often gets brought into consideration. While they do have a right to their own privacy, there was a choice already made in the beginning of their pregnancy that could have prevented this from being an issue down the road. And according to Tom Adriola in an article written in 2016, as individuals, a birth parent has a right to refuse a phone call, a letter, ignore an email, just like anyone else who does not want to correspond with someone. But hiding the truth is not how you properly protect a birth parent's privacy. In conclusion, I hope I showed you why adoptees deserve the basic human right of access to their original birth certificate. It's up to the states to decide if I get to know my medical history before starting a family or even in current conditions. I've always known I was adopted, but when I got migraines in high school, my doctors could not tell me if it was me being at a stroke risk or if it was genetic. And access to this paperwork would have saved me so much trouble, and I have to live with that every day. I urge you guys to strive to fight for the right to know for all adopted kids in every state. We deserve to know. Thank you.